the new currency in finance, which kind of picks up on something that Philip was just talking about. If you're keen, you can head over to stage 2 as well to hear Green Tinted Glasses, a sustainability lens in FinTech. But please come and join me on the stage. Michelle Weatherhead, the account executive financial crime from Fivecast. Brad Sawyer, the solution consultant, fraud and financial crime for Tira. I'm kind of getting scared. They're all experts in financial crime. Ben Davies, co-founder and head of product at Darwinium, and Nikita Lamasurier, who is the senior account manager at AWS Startups. Nikita, over to you. Give them a big hand. Come on, guys. Welcome to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us. And how perfect to follow CDR regulation with the conversation around trust. I think it's going to be, you're in for a treat. Today, what we're talking about is arguably the most important currency in finance. The digital economy has opened up opportunities for consumers to take on a lot of their own financial management practices, to transact across borders. The world has really opened up to the everyday layperson who doesn't necessarily know how this kind of infrastructure operates. And of course, that means that their data is set up in and amongst that infrastructure. How is it that they can then trust the institutions, the businesses, the entities who are dealing with that data and managing it? Of course, the underpinning to all of that is essentially a trust framework. And that does seek to actually protect the identities about which we are talking. So what happens when that trust framework is breached? Can an institution actually bounce back from it? And what responsibility or who holds the responsibility for trust in this particular very embedded, intersected, tightly funneled web? To help us answer that question, we've got a wonderful panel up on stage here with me to help us discuss some of these meatier points. Firstly, we have Michelle, an experienced technology and BD executive with over 20 years experience working in the anti-financial crime, intelligence and analytics space. She has worked with organizations around the world on a variety of AML and CTF, that's capture the flag, for those of you who don't know, and fraud prevention programs. In 2025, she joined Fivecast, an open source intelligence platform, to grow its presence throughout APAC, focusing on financial services and commercial sectors. Ben Davies, give a little wave, Ben, thank you, is co-founder and head of product at Darwinium. He started the company to reinvent fraud prevention at the cloud delivery network edge. A lifelong fraud fighter, Ben previously helped scale Threatmetrics to its 834 million USD. You jumped in there so fast, it's almost like you knew I was going to say that. We've got a little bit of AI here, ladies and gentlemen. At Darwinium, he's unifying fraud and security across digital journeys, giving businesses full visibility, stronger protection, and safer customer experiences for some of the world's best-known brands. And last but not least, we have Brad. Brad Sawyer is a solution consultant at Fortiro, with nearly 2 decades in banking and FinTech. He began his career in credit operations and underwriting before moving into consulting with NextGen.net, Rubik, Salesforce, and Frankie One, as well as leadership roles at major Australian banks and WorkSafe Victoria. I can't imagine a better crew of people to be answering some of these questions today. Brad, let's start with you if you don't mind. I've got some questions here, and the first one I'd like to kick off with is, how do individuals value trust? And are they aware of its importance before it's lost? And at that point, will it become an increasingly valuable commodity as well?
Yeah, great question. And look, I think people really don't know or think about trust until it's gone. And then once it's gone, it's extremely difficult to get it back. And so, I think there's, especially once you're moving into the, talking about trust in financial services, when that's broken, the impacts are massive, whether it's on an individual or an organisation. So, starting with individuals, there's clearly a financial impact that has on the individual, but also an emotional impact. we know that over the last year, nearly $3 billion was lost by Australians to scams. So, investment scams, romance scams, and the like. And so there's obviously, huge personal financial impact. Some people, lose their life savings. But there's also that emotional impact. And so, thank you. The emotional impact there can be as big as the financial impact. It leaves people feeling that they just can't trust anyone anymore, and really kind of impacts their overall worldview. Moving on to organisations, that impact is just as big. And so, in the last week, we've seen one of the big Australian banks get hit with a $240 million fine. Ultimately, comes down to trust and broken trust for, I think it's about 65,000 customers. And so that's part of the financial impact that they're facing. But the biggest impact is the reputational impact. Now, you can recover financial loss on the balance sheet, but what takes a lot longer to get out of the shadow from is that reputational damage. So really kind of lasting point that I would leave on this is that you've got to protect your trust as an asset. And so like your other assets, you need to invest in protecting that trust. And as it's one of your most valuable assets, you have to invest in it.
Thanks for that. In our pre-discussions, actually, we spoke a lot about the impact of trust, and it seems really clear to me that if institutions and businesses could implement it in every which way, they would. And yet we're in this age of generative AI where we are in an arms race in the cybersecurity space. And Ben, you said something really interesting when we were talking, which was adversaries adapt faster than release cycles. And kind of on that point, I wanted to ask, firstly, what did you mean by that? And is part of what you're saying there that a fraud event is actually inevitable for every one of these businesses?
So I guess the term adversaries adapting faster than release cycles comes from just the agility that some of these fraud actors have. We're playing as fraud fighters this constant game of cat and mouse with our adversaries, and they're clever, and they're not governed by any bureaucracy or anything like that. So it's this idea that you patch something, the fraudsters will find a way around it. To give you some details on that, let's say that you're protecting, let's say you were to do an IP reputation, you saw a series of events come in from, say, like an AWS IP, and you decided that we're just going to block that. It looks like a data center. You block it, I'll give you a 90% chance that same actor will come back within about 48 hours using something like a residential proxy. So they're constantly playing this game where they're reverse engineering all the controls that are in place, and we're constantly playing a game with them where we're trying to outsmart each other. What's also interesting is that they'll often change their modus operandi altogether. So we had a banking customer out of Southeast Asia. This was before we adopted them, and they buttoned up their account security fairly well. So previously had problems with account takeovers. They did some device linking, sorted that out. What was interesting there was that the fraudsters then moved on to the registration process. So they did a thing called SMS pumping. So if you imagine a registration form, they're putting in a reverse charge number there. And this bank lost 1.6 million in 3 days. Eventually, the solution to it was just to shut down the registrations altogether. So this sort of just shows the scale. People are looking for things. Anywhere where there's value, people are going to try and extract it. I think another one that was interesting with the customer was we had this Ukrainian fraud ring that was actually trying to diminish the budget of the fraud team. The way that they were doing that was essentially putting basically clearly fake IDs through the IDV system. IDV was costing 20 cents an interaction, burn through the fraud team's budget, they take out the product, it's a free-for-all. So, yeah, there's basically this constant game of having to, I think fraud is never a one game, you're never fully on top of it. And so your ability to operate fast and effectively is really important.
So it sounds like fraud controls are necessary. How then do you balance good user experience against cumbersome fraud controls and layers of authentication?
Yeah, so I mean, I think It's interesting. I was reading a report recently that said that 75% of consumers are willing to do things like multi-factor authentication if they believe it's making their customer experience safe. There is a balancing act, right? And I think that cleverly engineered systems will take that into account. So, when I'm browsing, do I need to do an MFA? If I do something risky, like I want to change my address or change my password, that's when you put those controls in. So it's a delicate balancing act. It's becoming increasingly difficult with things like AI to determine where and when to employ those sorts of mechanisms. But.
Great, thanks. And Michelle, there are a number of players in this game. We've spoken about a couple of them. We've spoken about vendors, consumers, institutions, but there are also policymakers and directors. Who is responsible for issuing and protecting trust as the new source of currency? And of course, a follow-on to that is are the board of directors that most of these businesses and institutions have today well equipped to face this broadening scope of antitrust?
Good meaty question. I think everybody has got a part to play in trust in the financial sector. Consumers, obviously, we've got a part to play. The banking sector, regulators, industry, and so on. And there's been some great movement within industry around creating the frameworks to help protect trust and embolden and share things like the Scam Prevention Framework, AFCX and the National Fraud Exchange in terms of being able to share data and collaborate against organised crime rings and scams and fraud that's attacking. And certainly from when I started out as a mere little fraud analyst 20 years ago, compared to now, the directors and the board are fully across, what's going on in terms of scams, security incidents, and so on. It's top of mind for everybody. I think an area that I would like to explore, though, with directors of companies is probably this concept of operational trust and how do you encourage operational trust within your organisation. So I've had the benefit of working both in technology, vendor side, and also within the banking sector in anti-fraud and financial crime defences. And one thing that struck me when working within the banking sector is that a lot of the operational processes, systems, setup is all very it's based on an old-fashioned way of operating. Things like, going to the directors for funding, new technology, new data sets, new ways of working. You're following the old ways of doing things with the annual funding cycle and putting in the business case, and whoever shouts loudest, who's got the biggest voice, tends to win. The way that operational teams typically run at full capacity, for example. So when I set up a fraud analytics team at Bendigo Bank last year, I was very mindful of setting up constructs and the way to manage the team so it fosters innovation. We're not running at 100% capacity all the time. We've got time to sandbox, to innovate, to tune, and so on. So it's really important that directors can give the space and guidance around innovation, agility from an operational trust perspective.
That's great, thank you. I think one of the things that I'm hearing here is stronger lines of communication within businesses to solve and remediate some of these challenges faster. But even thinking about speed in the policy sector as well, being able to build policy fast to combat some of the challenges that businesses are facing. On these evolving fraud tactics, Brad, can you actually talk to us about some of the emerging tactics that you're seeing in the space and how perhaps at Fortero you might be remediating some of these?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually a very interesting space because it is evolving very quickly, largely powered by generative AI and the proliferation of new tools. So traditionally, from a document fraud perspective, you're seeing what we'd call shallow fakes. And so this is where it's an original document that's been tampered with. Now we're seeing a lot more deep fakes, and so that might be a totally fabricated document that's been generated using something like ChatGPT, payslips, for example, which can be perfect, to the naked eye, and so very difficult to pick up that there's anything wrong with that. Through to images as well, which for a while, generative AI generated images and videos were in this, uncanny valley place. So they look pretty good, but there's always these things that you could see like, no, that's definitely Gen AI. To now, they're getting really, really good, and there's some that are coming through that are virtually indistinguishable from the real thing. Through to the latest tooling, which is agentic AI for the cybercriminal. So things like FraudGPT, WormGPT, and the like, which is very concerning because it's enabling these individual criminal actors and also syndicates to generate previously unforeseen massive amounts of content, fraudulent documents, strategies for attacking organisations as well, without those traditional hallmarks that you would see, often spelling mistakes, really sloppy ones that would be quite obvious. So that still fools some people, but now those are gone. So really, we're seeing this coming through in our customers a lot as well. So the way that you detect these is obviously, you need the right tool for each type. We had a customer go live recently. In their first week, they detected 100K fraud that before the solution was in place, it would have just gone straight through. Last year also we saw a $10 million auto finance syndicate that was smashed. So that the risks are real. Fraud is something that is happening not every week, it's literally every second, and across a diverse fabric, really, right across the industry. So I think what I would leave you with on that point is that the tools that criminals are using are evolving very quickly. They're using AI, it's part of their toolkit, it needs to also be part of yours. So it's a multi-pronged approach that no one tool is going to solve for you.
I think what's interesting about AI is it's really a democratization of skill.
Absolutely, yeah, good call.
I think there are some points in here as well around, obviously, digital infrastructure is accelerating the speed and the ability for us to transact globally. But what it's also doing is potentially in some ways eroding trust because it becomes a framework for scams, for fraudulent activity. Where do humans fit into that particular solution point to help combat some of these tactics that bad actors are coming at us with?
Yeah, good question. So look, I think the human in the loop is very important. So even with our solutions as well and others in the market, we're not totally removing humans from that equation as well. So there are certain indicators, say for example, that we are looking for, that if they're not there, we can go, great, none of those indicators are there. But there's still other things that you need to be looking at as well. That document itself might be totally fine, nothing you can pick up from that, but it is about having those other checkpoints as well. Document looks fine, but is the ABN on that document actually a registered and valid ABN? So we've got obviously programmatic solutions for those things, but there is the need for individuals within organisations to still be reviewing things that do look a little bit odd and considering the whole as well.
Gosh, it seems like there's quite a bit that goes into gathering just one person's identity. Ben, I'm going to pass this on to you. Why is an identity so important, particularly when these actors could be building their own synthetic data stores?
I think what's interesting is in the fraud world, identity is almost a form of currency. So these things are bought, they're sold. If you're familiar with the term of fools, it's basically a full set of PII, so your first name, middle name, last name, date of birth, something like a social security number or a TFN. Those are selling anywhere from $20 to $200 per ID, and they're the gateway to unlocking identity. So I mean, potentially applying for loans. You're able to, with those details, you're able to do a lot, not only on your victims, real estate, but also elsewhere.
Makes sense. I'm just thinking about the time. Michelle, I think it's probably time to talk a little bit about the future of trust. And I know, having worked very closely with Fivecast, this is an area in which you guys firstly excel, secondly talk about a lot. So I'm curious on your thoughts here, particularly having worked in financial crime for so long. How can the financial community actually address the challenges of building and maintaining trust in an increasingly hyper-digital world? And what does that collaboration or solution actually look like?
Yeah, good question. So Fivecast is a Australian scale-up. We specialise in open source intelligence and social media data and analytics, solving massive challenges and real-world problems in the investigation intelligence space. An area that I'm really keen to sort of look at from a trust perspective and layering that Fivecast lens on top of is around identity, and my identity that I present as a formal identity, perhaps to opening a bank account or so on, is quite different to the identity that I have within social media platforms. If we look at the amount of time that people on average spend, the average person spends 2 hours per day on social media across at least 6 different social media platforms. So it's a huge amount of our identity these days. And if you think about that data and what it presents and how we can leverage that to understand the true identity of a person and who that person's connected to, what do they really understand, what is their sentiment, I think is really, really powerful to help us get a better understanding of who we're dealing with. And from a trust perspective, is that person good, pure, with the right intentions, that's not set out to harm us?
I love this point of intentionality, and it's such a difficult thing to distill down. I mean, as humans, we've been determining for such a long time through micro-expressions, is someone, able to be trusted? I mean, the concept of how to do this digitally is really interesting, and kind of enter to the scene agents, where all of a sudden actions are automated and they come into our digital presence and they must be either accepted or not accepted. Ben, I'd love to just turn to you for a second on this concept about the future of agents and what that means, particularly when it comes to bad actor versus good actor intentionality.
It's interesting because I've always seen behaviour as being the next frontier of fraud detection. And what's interesting when you bring agents into the mix is that they make that harder to do. So, the other challenge as well is that there are good bots as well as there's bad bots. And distinguishing those is quite difficult. So if you're a marketplace, for example, you're probably going to want the good traffic in because you're opening, you're opening addressable market through these things, doing purchases on your behalf. And so I think the real challenge there is understanding the intent of these things and knowing whether what they're doing is acceptable behaviour. I think with agents, the real, as I mentioned, this idea of being able to upskill people that would have otherwise, there would have been a technical challenge. When you look at how these attacks are coming through now, they're just, you've got, mid-range people able to do things like put together phishing sites in, 45 minutes where essentially they're a man-in-the-middle proxy. So agents have really sort of evolved that. You see it less so with agents directly interacting and trying to do things, although that'll change. Their behaviour is fairly predictable. So what you tend to notice is things like timing. These things will click on buttons in the dead centre. So unless you're Jack Nicholson or have OCD, no human does that. But yeah, it's definitely a new frontier, that's for sure.
Something for us all to be thinking about. In our last 5 minutes or so, I'd love your final thoughts on, what does trust mean? What does the future of trust look like? Where should we be thinking as audiences who are really well placed to be solving some of these problems for consumers and for employees? Why don't we start with you, Brad?
Yeah, no worries. Well, look, I'll leave you with 2 thoughts. So first one is that trust is arguably your most important asset because it is virtually impossible to get it back to the same level that it was originally once it's been broken. And the prevention is always cheaper than the cost to repair. And then the second thought is that none of us can do this alone. You know, this is something that needs to be thought of as a fraud protection network. That right across financial services, I think we need to be able to share more data between our organisations so that we can enable that true defence at scale that we're, to combat these new threats that are coming through.
No, I think as Brad alluded to before, I mean, really, when you're designing systems, be designing privacy first. So live under this general idea that something bad will inevitably happen, and how do you, protect the surface area of what you've got to minimise that damage and that fallout. If you are indeed the victim of something, I think transparency, commitment to visible changes, and demonstrating appropriate governance moving on are the three things that would help you recover.
Boom.
And Michelle?
And I'd say don't forget the human element. We've talked a bit about technology and AI, but to really evoke that trust, have the right people at the right places. So from an operational perspective, have the right people there, speaking directly to the victims, to the customers, helping them, protecting them, steering them in the right way. And from a prevention perspective, it's an arms race to get those data scientists, get those analysts and retain them, create career pathways for them, give them opportunities to innovate, learn new technology. That's the way you're going to keep them. So if you haven't got a strategy for hiring and retaining data scientists, get out there now.
Or get a strategy for switching into that part of the business. Everybody, thank you so much. A big round of applause for our speakers today.